You are listening to the Next Play podcast, the playbook for high-performing leaders who want to exceed their full potential. From walking on the Ole Miss football team at 5'7", 150 pounds and earning a full D1 scholarship, to coaching thousands around the world and working with massive organizations like IBM. I've learned countless lessons that I'll be sharing right here with you. Join me as I interview some of the most successful people so you too can learn how to focus on always moving forward by deciding, planning, and executing on the next play relentlessly. This is Richie Contartesi with the Next Play podcast, and I'm extremely excited to introduce our guest for today. Her name is Tonya, and what she has done in the past 17 years is going to blow your mind, especially when it comes to leading people, driving revenue, sustaining it, and growing it. So she's been in SaaS for the past 13 years with a 17-year career. She's currently the manager of sales enablement at CarGurus. And she's got a big passion for seeing others and watching them learn, grow, and succeed. That's why she's so good at what she does. But ultimately, she's built a sales enablement team from the ground up. And from her results, she's done a good job of driving revenue, sustaining it, and growing it. So it's proven, and that's the difference. A lot of people can say it, but if you actually have proven results, that's the next level. And that's Tonya Montella with us here today. So Tonya, so happy to have you. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, absolutely. I'm super excited. Listen, if you're in any type of leadership role or in sales enablement, today is a podcast, or any leadership capacity, coach, you're a sales leader, you're an executive, a CEO. Today's podcast, we're really going to dive into growing people and growing teams on a very deep level. So, Tonya, let's just start. So you went to George Mason University. It's an awesome school. Share with me a little bit how you got there and how you transitioned out of George Mason.
Yeah, so I actually started out as a psych major at George Mason and ended up getting my degree in communication. And so I think the blend of those two is what led me into the field of marketing and advertising, right? So that's kind of where I started out my career, was doing roles like that, doing marketing for businesses, led me into going to an ad agency, which ultimately led me into more SaaS businesses that were ad tech based.
Got it. Okay, cool. So I want to start right here real quick. So you were a psych major, you said, right? Is that right? Yeah. No, because this is really cool. So you're taking and that's one thing, by the way, if you're listening, Tonya's experience that got her to sales enablement is so much different than everybody else. And that's why her skill set has allowed her to do what she's doing today. So one of the things I want to dive into real quick is your experience. So you were a psych major, and then you took that and brought it into the advertising world, because that's a big thing. Like, advertising is psychology. It's understanding people and the way they think and connecting with your target audience that you feel confident you can solve their problem. So walk me through a little bit of that. How did you make the transition from psych major into advertising?
Yeah. So like I said, I went from psych to communications. Ultimately,
communications. Sorry. Yeah, communications.
Ultimately, that's what I got my degree in. And with my communications major, a lot of the coursework was around, obviously public speaking, internal organizational communication, and then part of it was marketing as well. And so what you just said and how you described marketing and advertising and being really psych based, because you have to know them so well. You have to know your audience well enough to be able to figure out how to influence their behavior. So that to me what piqued my interest. And so that's kind of what led the meld of all those things, what led me into that path.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. So that's really good. So you got into advertising. Share with me what you did when you left George Mason. What did that look like? Where did you start?
Yeah, so I started out at a couple of different companies where I was doing marketing for the actual business. So for example, I think out of college, the first company I worked for was a company that was offering applications. They were doing something with applications for higher ed businesses. So, if you wanted to streamline that process, you would go through this business to do that. And so it was my job to market the company and their services. So yeah, it basically went from doing marketing for businesses to helping companies do their marketing.
Got it. So you started out and so you were doing it for other businesses. How did, so share with me how did you lead from doing it from other businesses to doing it? I'm assuming internally for one business. Is that kind of how it went down?
Yeah, exactly. And actually, it's a good question because I'm not quite sure. It might have just been the nature of things. You move from one job to the next, and it just happens to work out that way. I don't know if it was very deliberate that I took the step of saying I want to now help other businesses do their marketing. I don't know that I thought of it that specifically or intentionally, but that's how it ended up happening. And I liked it because you kind of said it earlier, where I have this passion for seeing people learn, grow, and develop. And, allowing me to help other businesses succeed was what I found to be fulfilling and interesting, because I was still tapping into that psychology interest I have, human behavior, creativity. You have to be very creative in advertising, of course. The digital aspect of things, right? Everything is digital these days. And so learning social media, and it just continued to grow as my career progressed as well.
Got it. Okay, cool. So you're working for like doing the advertising for a particular company. You're using these past experiences. What worked? Like, what did you figure out when it came to just marketing? I know it's a little off, but like what worked for you? Like, what did you find why you had so much success?
Great question. And this is so hard to answer because the industries in which I did this for varied so greatly, right? I just explained the one that was in the higher ed industry. I worked for one that was in the government sector.
Yeah.
Very, very big in the Northern Virginia area. So the industries varied greatly. So therefore the types of businesses I was doing this for varied greatly. And as you can imagine, the audiences varied greatly. And
okay, so how did you connect? Like, how are you able? Because that's what I'm like, you're in a role now where you have to connect with leaders in other departments, right? And so like, obviously there's a talent that you have, or a skill set or a philosophy that you have around influence and leadership, right? And being able to see people, understand what they want, and connect with them, right? And that's really powerful. So I'm trying to think through how were you able to transition, but always find a way to connect with the potential audience that you have? Was there something that, like, you know what I mean? Was there something when you just felt like, okay, here's our target audience, and you had a way in which you went about learning about them and understanding their challenges genuinely on a deeper level? Was there did you have a process around that?
At that time in my career, no. What worked for me at that time, to answer your question, was a lot of trial and error, trying new things. But part of that, to your point of influence, part of trying new things was getting the buy-in to even attempt the new thing, right?
Yes.
So I guess I was successful at that because they allowed me to try these new things. I would be able to compare and contrast the results of the different approaches that were taken, and then kind of just let that lead and guide me from there.
Got it. Okay, that's really good. Okay, so I did a bad job of asking that question. So how did you get buy-in? Like, what is your, because that, you're right. Like, I'm telling you right now, there's a lot of people listening struggling with buy-in. So how did you get buy-in?
I'll tell you how I do it today, because
no, that's good.
Think back over a decade ago is a little difficult.
Yeah. Today, how do you do it?
I think a lot of it, and it's funny, right? Because in sales, we talk a lot about the power of storytelling, but I find that is key to gain buy-in, because you have to paint the picture as to why you're recommending something in order for people to understand why it can make things better. So a lot of like the current state versus future state, asking questions along the way, because I think a lot of times people try and take the approach of a straight pitch with no engagement throughout, I always like to get engaged. Like, what do you all think of this? What's your reaction to this statement? Like, are we on the same page so far? And, make sure that they're with you throughout the way, because otherwise, at some point, by the time you're getting ready to suggest what it is you're getting ready to suggest, whether or not there's buy-in or not, or maybe you just need to say it in a different way.
So good. Like if you don't do that, they're not even in the room anymore.
Mhm.
They're so gone. And that engagement factor is so important. Like it literally is it's almost like an every minute and every 2-minute thing. As a speaker, like there's something that, I learned from a mentor of mine. His name is Blair Singer. And he taught like very specifically how to consistently keep your audience engaged, how to constantly ask questions, how to constantly say things to keep them saying things. And I think you hit on that really hard, which is, you're sharing something, but you're saying, are you with me on this? What are your thoughts on this? Are you following? Like doing that, keeping people engaged is so important. Let's just fast forward. Let's jump to, because I want to dive into this. So walk me through a little bit how you got to that. Like, was that, and specifically, let's talk how you transitioned into Data Zoo.
Mhm.
And then, I know we're jumping around a little bit, but I do want to follow along. So share with me how we got to Data Zoo. And is this something that you were consistently doing throughout your career, keeping people engaged, keeping people, walk me through that.
Mhm. So with with Data Zoo and around that time as well, the role that I had around that time was, again, just very client facing. So I was, managing accounts, working directly with different businesses to essentially enable, it's funny now that I think back on it, enable them to do their own marketing,
Yes.
their own digital advertising, uh, teach them up on the software or the service that, the company at hand would provide.
Yeah.
But with Data Zoo, I was essentially, I guess the title changed a couple of times, but a CSM, client success manager, account
Yep.
manager, however you want to think of it, for customers who were self-serve in using our ad tech platform. So I
Got
would
it.
teach them how to use the platform, but then I would nurture that relationship to not just teach them initially how to use the platform, but then how to use it to make their advertising more effective for better ROI over time.
Got it. Okay, cool. So when you were there, it was specifically like they were already using the platform, but you were their CSM, and your role was to make sure that probably retain, right, attrition to keep people,
Yep.
and also make sure that they were getting a return on their investment. Like that was your role.
Yes, and to, of course, identify any areas for growth, like working directly with the AE to say, hey, I've talked to this account for this amount of time about this particular thing. They're doing this next thing, which I think is a fit for this, for an upsell. Why don't you go ahead and you know do that slam dunk for me? So it was part of that as well. I wasn't directly closing the business, but I was looking for opportunities and doing a little layup for a seller.
Gotcha. Okay. And so from there, so you were client facing, did you move into a learning and development or talent development? Because I think is that when you started making that transition into kind of a leadership type role and development type role?
Yes, into a development role, not yet leadership.
Okay.
So I went from, so let me back up. What I liked about my role as a CSM, was being able to teach my accounts how to use the platform, but then to see them develop over time and see them start to really get it and need me less. Everybody wants to be needed or wanted, but at that point, then they wanted me, right? They wanted to engage with me to figure out like what was my opinion on something, or how might I change, the way that their account is set up, for better success. It stopped being a need and more of a want, and I like that because I was like, leading a horse to water and watching them go and fly on their own. And from there, I became a value add rather than like a a necessity.
Gotcha. What do you mean by a value add?
Like once they learn how to use the platform and run their digital advertising campaigns through it, you would think they wouldn't need me, but they still would, right? They would still ask for my opinions and my expertise, and ask for my help sometimes, just because I had built that rapport. So more of a value add in that way, almost like if you think of like consultative selling, right? Like more of that than like we need you just to get up and running. We need
Right.
how to do this thing.
Gotcha. Why the hell did you go from marketing and advertising and helping other people with an advertising SaaS platform, go into sales and sales enablement? Why did, because, you got marketing, you got sales, you got fulfillment, you got retention, you have to, why make that switch?
So interestingly enough, so we already pinpointed that was the one thing that I liked the most about that role that I held. But so then that's what led me into learning and development, right? Because I was like, I like to teach people and watch them learn and grow.
Yeah.
There was a learning and development opportunity at the company. I went for it. I got it. What the downside was, was that in that role, I was solely responsible for the learning and development for our new hires and our self-serve customers. So my audience, like you talk about understanding your audience and being able to speak to them specifically and their needs, there was no way I could have ever mastered, understanding my audience exactly. And so that's why I liked sales enablement, because it allowed for me to continue to flex those learning and development muscles, but my audience was just a little more niche than what I had been doing.
So real quick, so you had your external clients, but you also had new hires within the actual data zoo? Like,
Yes.
oh, so you had, huh? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, hey, that's business. I mean, I get it. Okay, cool. So that's a lot. All right. So, okay. So you were doing both of those, and that, like, obviously, that was a challenge, right? What did you find more challenging? Was it, I mean, obviously you'd been working with external clients for a while. So did you find that the new hires were more challenging than the external clients, or just the fact you had to do both?
That's exactly it. The fact that I had to do both. And it's funny because oftentimes when I look back at the different roles I've had and the times of my career, I realize I often find myself being a one woman show. And I don't know why. I don't know if that's a good thing, but yeah, that was, hands down, the biggest challenge was doing it all for everybody. It's just not sustainable. And I felt like I couldn't be as effective as I wanted to be in that role because I could never really narrow down the needs of my audience. Exactly. That was me.
Impossible.
Yeah.
That's literally, Tonya, why we just sold our facility. It was because this had taken off so much, and it was like this. And I was like, I can't. And even though it was super successful, it was like, the water heater exploded, and like the GM, like I even have a GM, and I was like, I have to deal with this. Like it's okay. So what do you think about this, Tonya? Like, as a human being, we are a battery, and every day we go to sleep and we recharge that battery.
Mm-hmm.
And you know this because you have a nonprofit, you have a gym too, which is kind of cool. Like that's a very similar thing between us. And so, even if you're not in the business,
Mm-hmm.
there's a percentage of battery that does get drained,
Mm-hmm.
even if you're not doing anything with it that day. And until you get to the point where you're like an Elon Musk or a Warren Buffett and you're so removed from the business,
Mm-hmm.
it will drain the battery, even if you're not doing anything on the business that day. So I just wanted to point that out for anybody listening. Like, if you have multiple things going on, like there's something very powerful about the one thing and having one focus. And I think that's something that you just pointed out, Tonya, that I just want to amplify. And you know what I mean? And just like when you found the one thing, going all in on that thing, you're going to be able to generate more revenue. You're going to be able to impact more people, because if you're focused on too many things, if you're focused on two things and you're helping 50 people over here and 50 people over here, that's your max, because you have to. But if you had one thing, you could help 250 people. And these are small numbers, but you know what I'm saying? Like in comparison, do you believe that as well, just from your experience there?
Totally. And the other thing that comes to mind when you say what you're saying is, I think there's such power in being pulled in two different directions, like the example you gave, right? Like having so much on your plate that you like, it's a good problem to have that you have to choose one way or another, because
Right.
wow, the failure and the growth that you experience in that, like with that challenge, is immense. And the one that you choose, I think you have that much more of a leg up because you've been doing so many things, and your learning trajectory has been so steep, that once you do pick the path that you want, you're going to be that much more ahead of the game, I think.
Oh my God. If it wasn't for owning that facility and what we went through, and like because I actually this isn't about me, this is about you, but let's just stick with you on this. I'm not getting into that story. But anyways, I one full-headedly agree with you 100% that is the name of the game. The name of the game is, so it's funny. I actually was in Nashville not that long ago, and I brought a friend with me, and I had a keynote, and in my bag, he opened up my bag because we had a couple different destinations. And in my bag, I had a stack of shirts, and every single shirt was the same exact shirt, and 3 pairs of sweatpants, and every single pair of sweatpants. This is a little overkill, but I've gotten to the point now where I wear my Next Play shirts, and I wear my black sweatpants when I'm traveling with my black shoes and my black socks. And when I speak, I wear the same outfit, and every day I wear the hoodie. And it saved me so much of like having to think, and I'm going all in on the one thing. Sold the business. Like I don't just like, I'm not just, you know what I mean? And I think this is just, it's worth the conversation, and you bringing that up and what it's done for you and your career, and look at now the people that you can impact. So if there's anything you wanted to add to that, you look like there's something you wanted to add. So
Yes, of course, because this can go so many different ways. It reminds me
whatever,
of
just let it go. It doesn't matter.
it reminds me of a conversation I recently had with my husband, because we talk about, only having so much capacity for certain things, right? So to your point about your battery, right? Like
Yeah.
if you've got all these things going on, you've got your day job, you've got your side business, maybe you're a parent, like
Hustle. Yeah.
whoever, you know what I mean? Whatever you're doing. When we were talking, it was in the sense of like laundry. Like, he was like, that's why I don't fold my clothes, because I just can't. I don't have the capacity. I have other things to worry about. You have to pick and choose. Like,
For
am I going
sure.
to allow this to consume me? This one thing, does it really matter? Or is it these things? You have to be very choosy about how you spend your time and energy, because it's so few.
100%. Like literally, if like you can spend a week and just figure out what you can and can't delegate. Like
Mhm.
that's what we did. We're like, okay, cleaning takes up this time. Let's find a cleaning person. Doing the
Mhm.
cars takes this time. I've pretty nailed down everything except for family time, which I'm not obviously going to delegate that. That's like crazy. That movie Click. That's what that reminds me of.
Yeah.
And also taking out the trash cans. That's like the one thing I haven't been able to to delegate, because it's an odd. Nobody's going to come over to take the trash cans once a week. I mean, probably you could, but anyways, that you need like a security team.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, no, 100%. That's like that's the next level of like, okay, now you're focusing on something, but here's all the things that go with that one thing. How can you take those things off your plate where you
Mhm.
can just focus on the bigger picture? So I love this. Okay, cool. So what is your thoughts around just talent development in general, right? You're in this talent development role, and then you went to a very well-known company, CarGurus. So before we get into that, share with me a little bit about kind of your philosophy around learning and development, and why you ended up making that transition to CarGurus.
Mhm. So for me, I feel like learning and development should always be the core to everything. There are some businesses that wholeheartedly believe that, and you can see it in the numbers, of their learning and development team, for example. They don't have a one-woman show like I was. um, and some aren't as bought into it. They maybe
Think
think
it's cheesy?
cheesy, we can get around it through other teams kind of taking on that sort of role without having a dedicated team or person or people to it. But I really think it's at the core of everything. If you don't have that and you don't have it embedded in your culture as a business, then what are you really doing, is kind of what what I want to say.
You're
Like,
turning and burning people.
Exactly. How are you getting anything to stick? How are you growing and therefore retaining your people? I mean, it can go a number of ways, but yeah, it's key.
So important. I mean, it's just like, yeah, I don't get it. I mean, like sometimes I'll work with a company. I'm like, what's your retention or your attrition rate? 85%. What? Yeah, we meet once a year. I'm like, well, no shit. Like
Mhm.
what? You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, so let's dive into this for a second. So share with me kind of what is learning and development to you? Because like obviously you said it's important, but what is it to you? Because like some people look at it as I'm just going to bring someone in once a quarter or once a year and we're good to go. Like obviously you come to a training, you leave with a notebook full of stuff and you do nothing, right? So like
Mhm.
what is learning and development to you and how the heck do we get it to stick? What's your process around that?
I think stick was the word I was going to use is
Nice.
for me, learning and development is not just delivering a training and leaving the room, checking the box, leaving it
So
at that,
dumb.
right? It's the reinforcement, it's the constant practice, it's the ongoing learning, the culture of even wanting to have that happen. I know some people are so annoyed, like, we got this training today, you know, I'd rather be on the phone trying to close some deals, and I get it,
Yeah,
but I
really.
think if you're not constantly practicing your craft and, you know, polishing up your skills, I mean, let's talk about a very relevant topic right now. Tom Brady would never slack on his practice, right? Like, I just think it's important to always have that sort of, you know, constant learning and constantly refining, like I said, your skills sort of mentality. And for me, that's what learning and development should be.
So what's the difference to you? Because there's the way I look at it is there's two sides, and I want to understand your thought process around this. So there's two sides, right? There's the technical skills, and then there's the intangible, like leadership, type skills, right? How, do you differentiate your trainings and your do you separate the two, or do you like what's your focus on? Yeah. Do you think about it that way, or do you think about it a different way? I'm very interested. Like I'm always trying to learn. What are your thoughts on that, or is all the training and development on like technical skills? What does that kind of look like for you?
Mhm. So the training can be a number of things, right? If it's a new product or service that's coming out to market and you need to make sure your sellers fully understand it and
Got it.
can
Yeah.
effectively articulate it, not just understand it, they can articulate it as well and, you know, identify customers that would be a good fit for it, that sort of thing. It could be
Mhm.
skills based. Again, like constantly, you know, refining your practice of your skill sets. I know probably a lot of salespeople out there are probably like, yeah, I'm a salesperson. I'm great at what I do. I do it all day, every day. That is my practice. But I tend to
Literally,
differ.
that makes no sense.
Exactly.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Right. So, you know, it's practicing the skills, refining the skills, leveling up. It could be systems and tools, right? Training, making sure that, you know, you roll out something new to your sellers. You want to make sure they know how to use it, yes, but use it effectively so that there's no, at the end of the day, the way I think of sales enablement is like you want to remove as many barriers as possible so that sellers can and account managers can do their jobs most effectively and most efficiently. So, you know, if you're rolling out a new system or tool, like that's great and all, you know, anybody could deliver that information, but you want to make sure that they know how to use it in their specific use cases and scenarios. And they're not getting hung up anywhere to where it's taken, you know, 10 minutes when it should take two.
Right. Right. Okay. Now, so it sounds like those are like a lot. Those seem to be like more like technical things, right? Like how to do this, how to do that. Do you also go the approach of things like EQ and, more soft skills, I guess would be the better word, or do you feel that that comes with the territory of how we hire and the culture, and we focus more on the technical stuff? What's kind of your philosophy around that or thought process around that?
Yeah, I think part of it is, you know, part of the hiring process, but I think too when I say skills training and you know, refining your skills, I feel that it's inclusive of those soft skills, right? Because, it's the how to do the thing and the processes that we have at this business that we all work at. But it's also, like you said, the soft skills, the stuff really behind the scenes and on the inside of you. So
Right.
yeah, I think of it as twofold. And to go back to your question, do I think of the trainings as different from, reps versus leaders, right? I do in a way. So I think a lot of times the information that needs to be understood is the same for both of those audiences.
Yeah.
But I do think there's value in, as they say, double clicking into that information and giving more of a leadership lens to it so that they know how to reinforce that information among their teams, how to look out for certain things, whether or not that person is competent in those areas or they understand that particular concept or they're illustrating that skill well. I think that's always key, and that to me takes it to the next level. If you can't get there, fine. I think you can still do a good job, but I think doing that takes things to a next level because I always see sales leadership as an extension of sales enablement.
It is 100. That's exactly what it is.
Mhm.
So how do you, okay, so real quick. So explain to me your role now. Like what is your, at CarGurus? So you're at CarGurus, you're managers in sales enablement. Like what are you like, what's your philosophy now at this point as far as training and development? Is this something you do often? You don't do often? Like, what are you seeing that's working for you now?
It's something that I do so often that sometimes people, when they think it's synonymous, like, oh, my team needs to learn XYZ. Let me go to Tonya, or let me go to Tonya's team. It's like at the core of everything that we do, it's learning and development based because we've told this story and how I got here, and this is why it's all based in that. But it's not the only thing that we do. Like I said, removing barriers to, you know, to selling more. It takes other avenues, right? There's the onboarding component, making sure that people are coming through the door with the proper knowledge and skills. But yeah, so it happens often. Like I said, sometimes so often we're almost thought of as the training team rather than sales enablement. Um, but sorry, what was your question?
Yeah, no. So like, no, this is good. So like, as far as your approach to, um, so a question that a lot would have is like, okay, so we're implementing this development and training. We believe in it, right? We understand that we're an extension of almost the sales leadership team. So how do we do that? Like how often do we have this development and training? What kind of does it look like? If I'm in a sales leadership role, yeah, I mean, that would be the first questions. Like, how would I take this development and training and number one, use it, but also how often do I need to do it? Like, what are you seeing that works?
Mhm. So for some businesses, right, the frequency in which training occurs is very much reactive, right? It's dependent upon, again, new products and services being offered,
Right.
new systems and tools being rolled out. But ideally, it would be an ongoing cadence where it's predictable. People know it's coming. They know that they have to do it. I think that breeds buy-in, right? Because they know it's coming and they know they need to be prepared. Maybe there's some sort of, ideally there's some sort of assessment, so they know that they're going to get tested on it. So they have to be really engaged throughout. But that in my opinion would be the ideal state where it's repeatable, it's scalable, it's something predictable.
Got it. And so it's so true. It has to be repeatable. That buy-in piece is so important. Would you agree that the easiest way to get buy-in is to watch them actually do something consistently and get a result where they're like, whoa, like this is working? Where like, then it's the buy-in is just like, poof, like, why would I not do this? Because especially with salespeople, they're like, I'm doing XYZ and now I'm making XYZ.
Mhm.
Like, You know what I mean? Like, do you find that, you're implementing a consistency that you're able to see that kind of result where people are like, why would I not do this? Because if I don't do, like, I'm getting this result. So I'm excited to go back to it.
Yeah. I think more of results as driving adoption, right? I think of buy-in as being the first step. So you have an idea, you have a recommendation, and you want folks buy-in of that plan or that idea. And then once you roll it out and you see the results of it, and you're able to, communicate that back and say, here's been the result, that's where you get adoption. Like people say, oh wow, it's actually working for other people. Like, why didn't I engage in that? Or why didn't I pay as close of attention when when they offered it up? Maybe I should be doing the same thing because I see that seller over there is just crushing it because they were engaged in that and I wasn't.
Like it. Do you feel like sales, like I had a huge shift a few years ago. I was working with a client and I was like, sales is not just getting somebody a product or a service that solves a specific problem for them. When I made this shift of like, never look at sales again as solving a problem for somebody, but as an opportunity to actually transform that person's business and their life. And then when you're doing outreach, right, especially if you're like an SDR and you're doing outreach, like if you go in with that mindset, oh my God, I'm going to connect with someone and I know that my program, my fulfillment will actually transform this person's life. It gives you this sense of conviction that's like so intense that your conversion rate is obviously going to drastically increase, but you come from a genuine place of like care and people feel that. I don't know. What are your thoughts on like that, and I'm just trying to get in your brain as to how you look at sales and then how you enable from there.
I like that approach or that mindset, because I care about people and I have that people side of me. But I think what I think of when I think through that, like from a seller's perspective, I feel like it's probably a tougher sell because it's easier to connect dots and say, oh, you need this, well, I have this, or you are struggling with this, well, I can give you that. Like it's easier to get that buy-in to tell
For
that
sure.
story,
Yeah.
right? If you have cause and effect, or you have one thing that can feed another. um, I think the downside of that is, well, what if they don't have a problem or they don't have a need, or you're just spinning your wheels trying to find it and it doesn't seem to be there. That I think is where it could come into play to say, do you just want to be better?
Yeah.
Right. But that I can see being a harder sell because of course anybody just always wants their business to be better, but does that mean I have to spend XYZ? I could see the conversation being a little tougher to have, but yeah, I could see ups and downs to both sides, of course.
Okay. And if you're looking at your sales team, right? What is your kind of like, what is your next play at this point as far as your sales team? Like, how do you plan on, actually, let me backtrack. How did you build your enablement team? You built an enablement team from scratch. How did you do that?
Uh, Buy-in. I mean, I don't know. It's so funny now that you're making me realize my level of influence. I guess I haven't taken a moment to really reflect on it, but
Yes.
it sure
Yeah.
does take influence to be able to say, I've been a solo act for some time. I need some help, and here's exactly the roles I think I need, and here's what I think those descriptions should be, and the types of people we should be looking at. And then you go out and you interview for them, and you find the people you think are a fit. You have the trust to pull those people in and go and make it happen. So that's how I did it. I think also too that going back to the trust aspect of it, right? Like, excuse me, having proven myself as an individual and establishing the trust that if you allow me to if you allow me to build a team, not expand my team, but expand my efforts and build a team, imagine what more I can do, right? If I just had some help. I think there's some credit to be lent to, establishing yourself first in order to get that trust and buy-in.
So true. I love that. Yeah. And then people look at you and they're like, well, look at what she's already done. Like, I want to follow. I want to be a part of that. And that's what you've done. That's awesome. Okay, cool. So as the sales enablement manager, CarGurus, big company, like what's your next play? Like, how are you going to move forward? How are you going to grow from this point on?
See what you're doing here. You're using your own system on me. I get it. I would like to grow more, right? The team, because when I think of the ideal state in terms of, the number of sales enablement professionals that you have to each, X amount of reps, I think of wanting to have better ratios in that sense and have more of a reach. So I think that is probably the next play, is just growing it further.
That's awesome. That's so cool. Okay, cool. Do you feel like that right there, like having more sales enablement pros to sales reps is the next level for you? Like that's what's going to take you from where you are to the next level?
Yes, because going back to knowing your audience, right? And how I said, oh, I like the fact that sales enablement, the audience was more niche than every employee coming through the door and every self-serve customer. Yes, it is, but there's so many more dynamics of, as you know, inside of sales, right? That you don't see until you see it, until you have the exposure to it. So seeing how many more dynamics there are, it still, is very much like, you think of a business that's like, I mean, everybody's structured differently, but say, their field team is structured by territory. If you could have a sales enablement professional assigned to each territory, they know how much better can you know your audience if you're assigned to a specific team?
Yeah, right? For sure.
That's my dream.
Because that is the audience, is their sales. So this is really good. So, I mean, not at CarGurus, but in general, what would you say is the ideal number of reps per enablement manager?
Oh, to the manager.
Not to the manager, but to an enablement. Sales reps to an enablement rep. What would be like, for I know companies will vary, but what would you say is like a good ideal?
So for some reason, one sales enablement professional to every 30, let's call it, reps feels good to me, because, and one would argue it should be less than that. Like you need small groups, like 1 to every 10 reps. But when I think about the size of businesses' sales teams and the number of sales enablement professionals you'd have to like that, to me, I don't know how many execs are going to buy into that. Like, yeah, we need a sales enablement team that's 20 deep. I mean, I just don't know how many people are going to buy in. But so I think maybe a more palatable in between is one sales enablement professional to every 30 reps, because you figure, you could break them down by groups of 10. And I like 10 because, you want to do small group training sessions. Of course, you want the information to stick. You want people to be engaged. But when it gets lower than 10, like you think of, some people say like they like 6, for example, 5 or 6. I think to myself, like, is 5 or 6 people driving enough diversity of thought? Like, is that really enough people in a group to really get meaningful conversation? Or may those 5 be so few that they're too similar to really drive some unique creative ideas and conversation? So 10 feels good to me. And the good thing about it is, if you break it into groups of 10, within the 10, I think a lot of times you can give them like the overall information you need to give them. And when it comes to more like practical application, like actually putting into practice the concept they've just learned into what that might look like for their particular day-to-day,
Yeah.
You can do breakouts. Okay, everybody go into, teams of 2. You know what I
Right.
mean? You have flexibility within
You
those
could
small
still
groups.
do that.
Yeah, I think it's manageable, but not so manageable that execs would roll their eyes at the idea of, one sales enablement professional to every 5 reps or
Right.
something.
Right. A little overkill. Okay, cool. No, this is good. Well, just for sake of time, Tonya, I really, really, really appreciate you being here and sharing your insights and what you've learned along the way. And for all of you leaders listening right now, I hope you took away a couple nuggets that you can use in your business to grow your people, grow your team, and grow your income. So, Tonya, is there anything that you thought of or that I missed that you want to share?
I don't think so. No, it was great conversation. Took me down paths I didn't expect. So I think we covered a lot.
I won't ask the most annoying question I'll get, like sometimes at the end of a podcast, they'll be like, so tell us something that we didn't know. I'm like, oh, I hate that kind of, so don't worry. I'm not going to ask you that. But if I missed anything and you felt like you wanted to share, but that's cool. So, Tonya, thank you so much for being here. And, I know your time is valuable. So, I really appreciate it. Thank you for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Next Play podcast. If you liked the show, make sure to leave us a review. For more resources, visit relentlessuniversity.com or download the free Relentless University app. And if you're interested in having me speak at your next event, visit relentlessrichie.com. Until next time.